Okay. So hello everyone again. Welcome back to PLG Disrupt. We are together with Peter Lyon, VP Customer Success at Poppulo and co-founder of Customer Success Network. Welcome, Peter. So nice to have you
Thanks.
here.
Thanks, Lilian.
So Peter will elaborate on is it okay to fire a customer? So when do you admit defeat and let a customer go? It seems like between customer success and product management, we're both so reluctant to say no to a customer or to recommend that they use another product, as ours will never have that feature. In this session by PLG Disrupt, Peter Lyon will outline his thoughts on this topic and his experience in dealing with this contentious topic. Peter will offer a decision pathway for people to examine and potentially use in their own company. So, Peter, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us and enjoy your presentation.
Thanks, Lilian. Greetings from Dublin, everyone. As Lilian said, my name is Peter Lyon. I'm the Vice President of Global Customer Success for Poppulo. We are an international internal communications company with 850 major customers around the world. I'm also the co-founder of Customer Success Network, which is Europe's largest network of customer success managers. I guess that if any of my marketing department are watching this is a provocative title. It's not reality. And obviously, if any customers are watching this is a provocative sort of title. And I'll talk a bit more about this later. A little bit of background on me, which may be relevant, is that I am quite unusual, perhaps, in that I started my career in technology as a software developer. And so I moved from software development into technical support, and then support into sales, and then sales into running a business, and then into running large customer success departments. So I do have somewhat of a strong technical background, and also a lot of experience in, I guess, that constant challenge of to what extent do we continue to solve problems for customers. I think one of the things that for those of us who work in customer success, or those of us who work in product management, is that we do find it hard to say no to customers sometimes. But I think the time has come that we have a serious and grown-up conversation about letting some customers go. So over the next 30 minutes or so, what I want to cover is why we need to talk about this particular topic. What are the 7 warning signs of a bad fit customer? What stops us from firing a customer? And what causes a bad fit in the first place? And how do we then avoid firing customers, because it's not good to be doing that? And then I'm going to just give a quick example of a prioritization framework for how you might deal with feature requests, which to some extent can be the heart of the issue in terms of a customer having a bad fit. And despite all of this, if at the end of the day you eventually come to the conclusion that you should fire a customer, then what are the steps that you should take to do that? So why we need to talk about this? And let's be very clear, engineering time is very, very, very expensive. So we cannot do everything for every customer. So we have to prioritize what engineering work we're going to do and what engineering work we're not going to do. If we think about SaaS solutions, they're going to be generating 105 billion in revenue in 2020, according to Gartner. So SaaS is, we know, is the future, and it is continuing to grow. And most technology platforms are now SaaS on cloud enabled. On that basic premise that we have one single code base which satisfies all customers. But the reality is somewhat different, because customers are not all the same. So they are as diverse as their businesses are. So I think we have to wake up to the fact that we cannot satisfy every single customer. There has to be some customers that we're going to have to leave behind. There are some customers that shouldn't be customers in the first place. But we're not rewarded to turn down unprofitable revenue, especially new logo sales. So if you're in a hyper growth SaaS company, your salespeople are typically not they are going to be rewarded to get new logos, as opposed to customers with the best fit. And finally, is that the only reason why we need to talk about it is that most of us don't have a process for purposefully terminating or firing some customer relationships. So a few months ago, I posted this on LinkedIn, which did frighten my marketing department again, which is I want to fire a customer. I then clarified that this was a deliberately phrased provocative statement. But what I wanted to sort of see was how many other people in my position have actually reached a point whereby they took that decision to terminate a relationship. And the reason why I was interested in reaching out to a lot of people throughout the network was I was dealing with a customer that for years we were constantly having to backtrack, constantly having to do patches and workarounds. And ultimately what it turns out was that they were just a very, very bad fit for us. So I wanted to see, well, how are other people beginning to sort of tackle this? And so the rest of my talk to some extent is sort of drawn upon conversations with probably about 50 to 60 different senior CS people and some product managers around how they approach this particular topic. Because let's be clear, this is not something that you're going to bring to your CEO on a regular basis. You have a customer that's maybe worth 200, 300, 400,000 a year in ACV, and suddenly you're recommending that they're no longer a customer. That's not going to go down very, very well. So again, you need to have some sort of process or some well thought out logic behind that. So let's look at the 7 signs of a bad fit customer. The first one is that their solution is heavily customized and possibly has code or workarounds that are outside of the platform. So it becomes more and more difficult to support over time. Every time we upgrade the platform, we have to consider all of those customers who have workarounds outside of the platform, and sometimes they are not included in the standard QA process. They're constantly asking for changes, and they never seem happy. They disregard your advice. So despite all of the recommendations of how to set certain settings or how to tweak certain settings within their own environment, they don't do it, and they expect your solution to slot in nicely within theirs. They always refer to the fact that sales said it would do this feature, but there's no evidence of that ever happening. Now, I know some people out there might say, but sales are always over-promising. Yes, they are, but a lot of the times they don't. And I think there are some customers who might sort of leverage that legend, if you like, that, well, you know, the sales guy said that we would be able to do this, but no. So none of your other customers appear to have the same issues, or if they do have, it doesn't have the same impact. So I think that this is also something that we have to be very, very mindful of, and I'll talk about this later, is that how important it is to validate the feedback from a particular person in a customer that the workflow isn't right. Because there are some times that when you talk to other end users in that customer, they don't appear to have that problem. More annoyingly or more disappointingly, there are some people out there that are consistently mean or abusive to your employees. So that is definitely a sign of a bad fit customer. So the workflow might be a bad fit, but the culture is not a strong fit. And if they blatantly refuse to act as a reference, now there might be reasons for that. There might be competitive reasons, legal reasons, and so on. But if these reasons are not in that category, then I think you have to examine, well, maybe this customer is a bad fit. So what stops us from firing a customer? Well, the first thing is that we just don't do it. It's not in our culture. We must do everything that we can to keep all customers, and that in today's environment just simply isn't true, because not all customers are the same. As your company grows, as your product grows, and maybe you're in a SaaS company that is moving more and more towards the enterprise, then what is it that you do to the smaller customers, or perhaps your first customer? We can't stop, you know. So if you think about some of the first few customers you have, and maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years later, that what they were looking for is completely different. Your product may have changed. So there is a reluctance a reluctance sometimes to be honest and true with some of your early customers and say, do you know what, where we're going is not where you need us to be. So it's time that we had that conversation. The third one is that the obvious, which is that we're going to lose revenue. So if a customer goes, then obviously we have to backfill that revenue. And the head of CS is not going to be terribly happy because if they have a retention target, which they should, then they're going to see this revenue disappear. And for CS, it's impossible to actually get extra revenue unless they're in charge of expansion across. There's a fear that it sets the wrong precedent, that suddenly the market's going to hear our people believe that we're no longer customer centric because we terminated a contract with a customer. Conversely, you've also got the promise of a glowing reference if we do what they want. And that's also something that we need to be mindful of. That the sales side might say, no, we need to keep this customer because they're going to give us a great reference. Well, the thing is that they won't give you a great reference, because if it's a bad fit, then that reference, you shouldn't let your customers talk to that customer. And we, and by that is customer success, product engineering, we love solving problems and customers. So we're kind of almost, no pun intended, engineered to try and solve problems. But we need to be solving problems in the context of those customers. So we should only be solving the problems of the customers that have the strongest fit, that are the most aligned to us. So what causes a bad fit in the first place? Well, it's a poor sales handover to implementation and the customer success team. So starting off bad and not making sure that there were any sort of promises, as I alluded to earlier on, or we didn't go in and validate the requirements sufficiently enough. So the expectation hasn't been managed correctly. So, and with that, so we haven't established what those clear customer outcomes were and the goals and the expectations. We haven't validated the customer requirements. The customer is no longer committing resources to the project, and that can be a real red flag. Or maybe we've lost the champion. There's a lack of understanding with the customer and the long-term vision of the product. And I think that that's something that is very, very important, is to always make sure that the customer understands where you are going with your product. And that way, you can have that conversation with them, that if they believe or if they are expecting the workflow to go one particular way, but you're going the opposite way, then it's important that you have that conversation with them. This is the obvious one, which is a lack of functionality in the product that the customer perceives as a mandatory one as opposed to desirable. So you might have one or two customers say, we must have this feature, but if nobody else wants to have that feature and they threaten to churn as a result of not having that feature, well, then you also need to have that conversation. Because I go back to my earlier point about the engineering resource being very expensive, overworked. And so, yeah, it's important to understand to what extent one customer is going to drive your product roadmap, or is it the majority of your customers? So I think it's about the decisions that we make around what we build for one customer. It has to benefit all customers, or at least most of the customer community. So more causes of a bad fit in the first place is a lack of process for prioritization of feature requests. And I think this is really important and something that we've worked hard at Poppulo. And I'll touch on this later on as well, which is we can't do everything. I read something recently, which was that you shouldn't call them feature requests. You should call them ideas. And I think that when we're in sales, when we're in as customer success managers, is that we're doing QBRs. We're trying to keep the customer happy, if you like, and we're trying to make sure that they're extracting maximum value from the platform. And I think sometimes we almost get a little bit too cozy sometimes with the customers, and we say, yeah, no, I'll bring those feature requests back into product management. And in product management, though, unless they're given the context behind that, like why is that customer actually looking for that feature? What is that going to change? Or can we do something further upstream in their workflow that will actually result in us solving that issue for them without having to do any code change? So can we change their process more upstream? So I think it's by not having those processes in place, I think we're setting a false expectation and a false narrative with some customers. There's and this is most of what I'm going to touch on here is really from an internal process point of view. There's an informal prioritization outside of an established process. So customer success engaging directly with engineering teams and escalating to senior execs. And what I mean by that is where either the customer success managers or the sales managers bypass product management completely and go straight into engineering. And of course, engineering don't have any context, or else everything is just escalated to a senior exec. And that's despite the fact that there is an established process for escalating feature requests. And the obvious one would be the end of quarter or the end of financial year when sales are trying to close deals. And suddenly there is a tsunami of requests coming in to the product managers that we must do this. If we do this feature, if we do this, then they're going to close. Now it's very difficult to stop that from happening, if not impossible. So there are times when the bad fit journey just starts right at the beginning. So how you begin to deal with that, I'm going to cover later on. I think this is really important, which is a lack of a standard response time for feedback for requests can frustrate the customer. I've spoken to a few VPs of product on this, and a lot of them have now started to build in a feedback loop mechanism, and that's where there's full transparency with the customer and about their feature requests. And also, rather than, so if a customer in a QBR says, we'd love to have these type of features, we go back, we talk to product talk to engineering, we size it up, we go back. I think it's really important to do that within a week or two, or to do it as timely as possible, and not to leave a whole series of feature requests sort of build up. So you end up in a situation where you're sitting down with a customer and they take out a spreadsheet and it has 15 to 20 different feature requests that we've been asking for the past 2 years, and you haven't done any of them. Now, for a senior exec in that customer, then that's not going to be a pleasant thing for them to hear. So having standard response times and getting back to customers quickly with full transparency, and be honest with them. If you're never going to do the feature, say you're never going to do the feature. Don't try to duplicate them and kick the can further down by saying, well, we might do that in the next quarter, or we'll try to get that on the product roadmap in about 6 months' time. I think it's super important to be really, really, really honest, and that's what people will respect. Because otherwise they think that you don't listen. And this refers back to my earlier point that if you don't go back to customers in a timely manner, as far as they're concerned, you don't listen. I recently had to do this to a customer of ours where there was a particular defect in the product. Now, it wasn't of a serious nature. However, it was annoying some of the senior execs in that customer. So when I spoke to the senior exec, I explained to them that the reason why we weren't going to address that defect is because we had to divert all our engineering time to other features and outputs that was going to give them other benefit over here. And the reason why we were doing that was because we were listening to our customers. And then they turned around and said to me, all right, so you do listen to your customers. So they just thought that we weren't listening because we weren't giving them a definitive answer. Once we gave them a definitive answer and we were honest and said, we're not going to fix that because we're doing all of this. So here's all this value that you will get. So we diverted their attention away from a very minor defect into, okay, I understand that you guys are going to build something that's even better. There's no process for unplanned requests from internal teams. And what I mean by that, again, is that how you decide to do the requests that are coming in. So if engineering have got the entire quarter mapped out in terms of this is the work that we're going to do for next quarter, and the quarter after that we assign all our resources, then how do you actually deal with all those unplanned? So you might have existing customers that turn around and say, well, we're not going to renew unless you fix this particular defect. So that's important that you have that process in. So what can we do to avoid firing a customer? Well, first of all, you need to demonstrate to your exec team that you've exhausted all efforts to keep this customer, right? And what I mean, so this is sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek, but don't go to your exec team with, okay, look, company A, they're just really annoying me. That's not sufficient. So have you exhausted all efforts? Second thing is, don't do it. Just put up with it and waste all that valuable engineering time. And the third option is to do the opposite of the last two slides that I showed you. So how to avoid firing customers part two, if you like. So validate the customer requirements during the implementation phase. Make sure that that you're setting the right expectations. Agree the success criteria by which the customer is going to measure the success of the project, and that's critical. Agree and document the roles and responsibilities. So what is it that you need the customer to do for you during that implementation phase? You can use the renewal as an opportunity to realign and reset expectations. So when you're sitting down at the renewal time, maybe I do it maybe 3 months before that renewal, have that open conversation, right? Go through all the support tickets, go through all the feature requests that they've given, and be open and honest and say, okay, look, we are going to do all of these, but we're not going to do these. So the renewal is a commercial window, it's a commercial opportunity to reset those expectations. Ensure that your customer and all your customer facing staff have a full understanding of the long-term vision of the product. I think this is really important. That again, this is really about setting the expectations as to where your product is going, and during the QBRs or whatever cadence of our structure of meeting that you have with your customers. And I would strongly advocate that at least once a year, the product manager, our product managers, join the CSMs with the customers. Listen to what the customers have to say about maybe their concerns, also where they're achieving value. It's important to get both sides of that. But also that you're constantly reminding the customer of where you're going with your product and why you're going there with that product and how other customers are getting value from it. I think that's really important, so that it never becomes a surprise to the customer, or you don't get a surprise from the customer that says, look, we're going to terminate the relationship because we want to go this way. And then you suddenly find out, well, that's where we're going too, but it's too late because they've asked somebody else in. So this can help establish clarity of direction and help stop any misunderstanding. And finally, just be open and honest if features or technical blockers are not going to be addressed either in the coming quarters or ever. And what's important to do there is to offer economic and non-economic concessions. Over the past 6 months, what we've realized during this very, very troubling time, obviously for everyone, but one of the knock-on effects of that has been how budgets have tightened, and also cash flow. So what we're finding is that sometimes you can offset bad workflow defects that you're never going to address, maybe because the new version in 6 months' time is going to supersede that particular feature, is to offer the customer some economic and non-economic concessions. This is the example of a prioritization framework that I spoke about earlier on. I think it's really important that you have something in place that, how do we decide which feature request should be done, which one shouldn't? And so this is one that it's just an example of one where you look at what is the severity of this. So the customer, how severe is this to the customer? Is it impacting their overall achievement of value? Are they at risk of churn? Are they at status red? And then what's that value? So how severe is it? What is the value? So you might make some choices here that if a customer is below a particular value, it doesn't mean that you ignore them. It just means that you factored that into your decision-making process. Or it might well be, well, no matter what your ACV is, we will always look at addressing some of those defects. But I go back to my earlier point, you're very fortunate if you can address every single customer. But as you get bigger and bigger and bigger and you have more and more customers, you're going to get more and more feature requests coming in, more and more diverse workflows. So it's important that you have some contextual process. So by the time it gets into product management, that they understand the context and the nature of this request. And that's this part here, which is the validity part. So the problem and solution has been verified at the highest level by the customer. I made the point earlier on just to be absolutely sure about who you're dealing with within the customer. So validate that this defect or this feature request is instrumental to the customer achieving their desired outcomes and the value. And also that the fulfillment is going to secure the renewal. And the request has been reviewed by a pod of CS, PM, and engineering. So when you've done all that, or whatever process you may have for assessing whether or not you do a feature request or address a defect, is to give the feedback to the customer in a timely manner, whether it's good or bad. Don't shy away from it. Just be honest with them and demonstrate that you are actually listening to them. So if you've then come to that moment of how you should fire a customer, first of all, is don't use the word fire. Right? So that may be very, very obvious, but don't say, "Oh, sorry, but we're going to fire you." And you've got to manage them very, very carefully. Be professional. Explain to them why you've come to this decision. Explain to them, you're asking us for all this type of work. It's not where we're going. Be grateful for their efforts and their patience and their business. Offer to keep them engaged. So even if you do terminate the relationship, they might have some fantastic ideas. It's just that right now your company is just not ready for that, or the direction, it just isn't there. But you still want to keep them engaged in it. You resist telling them how to fix their problems because they probably know what their problems are, or if they don't perceive that they have any problems, the problem is you. And then finally, to propose an alternative solution. So don't be afraid to hand them over to a competitor. Now, it's not in the spirit of I'd like to pass over a problem child to another company, because that's not going to be useful. But I think that in terms of your own reputation as a business, and also perhaps as a product manager or as a CSM, is that customer is going to be grateful that you solved the problem for you. Now, your CEO and your VP of sales mightn't be happy because you've lost some revenue, but nevertheless, that customer is, and I think that that stands you well. And be prepared to concede on any contractual issues. So if the customer is on a 2-year deal, let them break it, even though maybe the contract doesn't allow for any break clauses. So don't, just within reason, obviously, that you need to be prepared to concede on any of those contractual issues. So, and give refunds if you can. Now, your CFO is not going to thank you for that. So that's what I have to cover, and I think I've done it within the and let them terminate contracts for convenience. So in summary, right, you'll always have customers that are a bad fit. So make sure you have some kind of process in place for how you deal with them. Reduce the risk of a bad fit at the start of the customer journey. Be prepared to be honest and transparent with customers. Tell them the bad news. And have a defined process for firing a customer. But make sure you have senior executive approval and a defined process. So thanks very much for listening. It's been great talking to you all. I can't see any of you, but thank you very much. And I'm going to hand back over to Lyon.
Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I have 2 questions to ask you, if I may.
Yep.
So, first question is, when do customer requests qualify as a no fit with product vision?
Sorry, when do customer
requests qualify as a no fit with product vision?
As a non-fit to the vision.
Product, yeah.
Well, I think that depends on what your vision is and how clearly mapped out you have your product vision. Most companies these days do not have a defined product roadmap. They almost have like a roadmap to a particular position in the marketplace or a very high level sort of business outcome that the platform will actually deliver. I think it's
Oh, I think we lost Peter due to technical issue. Okay, I have you with me again.
I'm back again.
Yes, that's good. That's good. Sorry, sorry you got interrupted.
Yeah, look, as with most of these things, it's about all the different processes. That if you one of the things we're working on at Poppulo is a customer listening framework, where if you think about all the different touch points that you have with a customer, whether it be the QBR, it be support calls, it be sales engagements, all the different things that you're going through a maturity model with them, you're constantly picking up needs, right, from a particular customer, and in most cases it's from a particular contact in a customer. So I think when feature requests go into your vision, I think you have to qualify them really, really carefully. And look, the reality is that the feature request from a customer that's paying you $1 million a year in annual contract value, right, is going to be listened more than somebody who pays you 10. However, if you have 1,000 at 10,000 a year, and they're all saying the same things as well, so it's about having the right criteria for which features do we do and which do we not do. And there's an element of luck. There's an element of also following the money as well.
Okay. So another question from the audience. Who decides the ACV limit for measuring the worth of a customer?
Oh, yeah. I think that there has to be a joint decision in Poppulo. That's between myself, the VP of CS, the VP of product, and the VP of engineering, because we are the 3 stakeholders that are most affected. Now, I know the CFO will say he or she is affected, and the CEO will say he or she is affected too. But if we think about just that 3 of this, CS, engineering, and product management, together we're making that decision. And if it's a prospect, then the VP of sales is going to come in to that conversation.
Okay. So another question is, how do we influence the CEO or executives to say no to a very big enterprise customer, especially if his request doesn't fit the vision but is a high revenue customer? This is a very nice question.
Yeah, I think it's a very real question. Um,
Yes.
and I think it's what we have to face up to, that there is, you can put in all the best intention, all the best process, we
Mm,
do this, we won't do this, but we'll do this and so on. It comes down to the culture of your company. It comes down to the stage it's at. If you're
yeah.
if you're a serious C or D or E backed, and
Mm,
you're in hyper growth, and it's all about logo acquisition,
of
right?
course. Of
Then
course.
that has an impact. So it isn't one of those binary
Mm,
factors. If and it comes down to maybe the risk that the company wants to take.
mm-hmm,
So if, and maybe where your platform is at. So if you have to do a lot of re-engineering, and you've got say you've identified 5,000 man days of engineering work, right? Then you might say,
okay.
well, no, we're not going to take this $500,000 a year contract because our
Mm,
commitment is over here. But this is where the CEO needs to get the support of the board and the
mm,
investors to say no. So it's, when you're talking about situations like you just asked, which I understand the question, you put all this thing in place, but as soon as somebody waves a checkbook, you just
mm,
you just forget all the things that you put in place.
yeah. So another question, a final question. Are there any best practices on customer feedback assessment that you would like to suggest to our CS peers here?
Any
Any best practices
in giving
on
the customers feedback.
assessment? Yes.
Um, I think it's as I said. I think it's the journey with the customer always starts at the beginning. I know that sounds incredibly obvious, right?
Mm, mm,
But if you have established the business goals, the business outcomes, right? So what is the customer really trying to achieve with your platform?
mhm,
And typically they will be all the time solving a business problem. So I think any form of assessment has to be based around how much do you really understand the
mm,
goals of your customer, the business goals. So the reason why, and your platform is not the core solution to solving their problems. It's going to be a combination of many things, of which your platform is part of it. So
mhm.
to me, it always comes back to, do you have full grasp and full understanding as to what the customer is trying to achieve? If you do that, then everything just has to lead back to those goals, right?
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
but if you do the assessment outside of that understanding, you're going to end up with focusing on part of the solution, part of
Mm.
the problem, as opposed to all of it.
Okay, yes, of course. I totally agree. And I must admit that your presentation and your answers were extremely resonating. so,
Good.
so thank you so much for your contribution to this conference. I wish you all the best, and I hope we see together each other maybe next year. Okay?
Okay. All right. Cheers,
Nice
Lillian.
to meet
Bye.
you. Bye
Bye. Bye.
bye.
Bye.
So, in a few minutes, we will have Teresa Anania with us, VP of Global Customer Success at Zendesk. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes. Bye.